Now, imagine this. One of the biggest movie stars in the world walks into a homeless shelter. No cameras, no crew, just him. But what he leaves behind will leave you speechless. Was it a publicity stunt? Or something much deeper? Stay tuned to find out how this quiet, unexpected visit changed everything. Trust me, you'll want to see this till the end. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartwarming stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe, because you won't want to miss what's coming up. It's a typical afternoon at the local homeless shelter. The hustle and bustle of the day are in full swing. Volunteers move quickly, sorting donations, bags of clothes, canned goods, blankets. The staff is on their feet, assisting those who have come for shelter, food, or just a place to rest. It's a rhythm they know well, a dance of efficiency mixed with compassion. The energy is constant, sometimes frantic, as residents settle in and prepare for the night. The air is filled with the sound of hushed conversations, the clink of metal trays, and the shuffle of feet. It's a place of routine, and yet, there's always a sense of unpredictability that hangs over it. Then the door swings open. The bell above the door chimes, a sound that's barely noticed by the regulars in the shelter. But the staff, busy with their tasks, can't help but glance up when the man steps in. He's older, his face marked by time, but there's something about him. His presence is calm, almost magnetic, with an intensity that can't quite be ignored. The man doesn't say a word, doesn't make a fuss. He simply enters, his eyes scanning the room as if he's quietly observing the lives unfolding around him. Dressed casually in a worn jacket, jeans, and a simple cap, he doesn't stand out in the way you might expect a celebrity to. He blends in, but at the same time, there's something undeniably different about him. A quiet confidence radiates from him. Jenna, a staff member who's been with the shelter for a few months, glances up from the clipboard she's filling out. Her pen freezes midair as she processes what she's seeing. A feeling of recognition hits her. She squints, then her eyes widen. Wait, she breathes, barely audible. Is that Clint Eastwood? She quickly nudges her colleague, Mike, who's standing near the kitchen area, chopping vegetables for the evening meal. His knife pauses mid-cut as he turns, a puzzled look on his face. Mike glances over, his gaze lingering on the man by the entrance. For a second, there's uncertainty in his eyes. The man is unassuming, certainly not drawing any attention to himself. He's just walking in like any other person. But Jenna, now standing up straighter, is convinced. It has to be him, she insists under her breath. It's Clint Eastwood. Mike shrugs. Could be. But he's not exactly making a scene about it. No one else in the shelter seems to notice. The day continues on as usual, with everyone too busy to realize that one of Hollywood's most legendary figures has just walked through their doors. Clint moves through the shelter like any other person would, quietly, respectfully, not looking for recognition. He's just another face in the crowd, or so they think. Clint continues to move through the shelter with a calm, unhurried pace. He doesn't seek out any special attention or try to make himself the center of the room. Instead, he quietly engages with the residents, stopping here and there to chat. His conversations are brief, but there's a genuine interest in his eyes, a warmth in his voice that seems to put people at ease. He speaks with Maria, a woman who's been coming to the shelter for years, and listens carefully as she shares the struggles she's faced. Clint nods thoughtfully, offering a few encouraging words. Nothing grand or over the top, just a simple "you're stronger than you think." He then quietly moves on, leaving her with a small smile on her face. Across the room, he stops to speak with another resident, a man named Earl, who's sitting by the window, staring out at the city. Clint listens patiently as Earl talks about his time in the military, his lost family, and the hard road he's traveled. No cameras, no flash, no spotlight, just a man who's listening, really listening. As the conversation ends, Clint offers a nod of understanding and pats Earl on the shoulder before moving on, leaving behind an almost serene atmosphere. It's not the Clint Eastwood that anyone expected. There's no fanfare, no entourage, no PR team. No one seems to recognize that the famous actor is standing just feet away, having an intimate, personal conversation with someone who's living in a shelter. He's just a man showing kindness, offering his time to those who don't often get the attention they deserve. But as Clint continues his quiet walk through the shelter, the staff members are beginning to exchange uneasy glances. Jenna can't stop watching him. She's still in disbelief. Could this really be happening? I mean, really? She says to Mike, who's leaning against the counter in the kitchen. He's just walking around, talking to people like he's one of us? Mike shakes his head, still unsure. Yeah, but it's Clint Eastwood, he responds, his voice low. You don't just walk into a homeless shelter like that unless you're here for a reason. He wipes his hands on his apron and looks over at Clint again. Maybe it's for a documentary? Or a new movie? You think he's filming something undercover? Jenna doesn't buy it. I don't know, Mike. Something about this feels different. Her voice carries an edge of excitement. He's not acting like the Clint we see on screen. No cameras, no crew, no nothing. He's just here. But as she speaks, doubt begins to creep into her mind. Maybe Mike's right. Maybe this is some kind of stunt, some publicity for a new project or a hidden camera show. It's hard to shake the feeling that something is off, but no one has any concrete answers. The other staff members start to whisper amongst themselves. Some are still skeptical, while others, like Jenna, are growing more and more certain that Clint's presence here is something deeper. But even she has to admit, he doesn't seem to be here for recognition. He's not pushing for attention, not fishing for compliments. It's almost as if he's just being himself. And that's the part that the staff can't figure out. Why would someone like Clint Eastwood, someone with so much fame and influence, come into a homeless shelter and just blend in? What could he possibly want from this place if not recognition? As Clint continues his quiet walk through the shelter, talking to people, helping when needed, and leaving behind a sense of calm in his wake, the staff remains in limbo. They can't shake the growing sense of unease. What is he really here for? And as the minutes tick by, the question lingers in the air. Why here? Why now? As the hours pass, Clint remains a quiet figure in the shelter, blending into the background, yet somehow commanding attention without trying. He moves with a sense of purpose but never rushes, always taking his time to observe, listen, and connect. The chaos of the shelter continues around him, but Clint's presence is a calming force that no one can quite explain. He doesn't draw attention to himself or seek any form of special treatment. He simply exists in the space, like a shadow among the bustle. His gaze lingers on the people around him, each one carrying their own stories, their own burdens. But he's not just observing, he's engaging. In the corner of the room, Linda sits, her face hidden behind a curtain of unkempt hair. She's been at the shelter for weeks now, struggling to find her way back to some semblance of stability. Her body is slumped, her energy drained from the weight of a life too heavy to carry alone. She barely notices Clint as he approaches, but when he sits beside her, the unexpected company makes her glance up. Clint doesn't say anything at first. He simply sits there, his presence a quiet comfort. After a few moments he speaks. His voice is low, measured, but somehow it cuts through the noise of the shelter, offering Linda something she hasn't felt in a long time: attention. For the first time that day, Linda seems to open up. She talks about the pain of losing her job, her home, the overwhelming sense of isolation. She talks about the late nights spent wandering the streets, hoping for a break, wondering if anyone out there cared. Clint listens intently. There are no judgments, no interruptions. He just lets her talk, the weight of his gaze showing that he's truly hearing her. Every so often he nods, offering a few words of comfort. You've been through a lot, but that doesn't mean it's over. You've got more fight in you than you know. When the conversation comes to a close, Clint doesn't offer grand promises or empty platitudes. He doesn't make any show of his intentions. Instead, he leaves Linda with a warm smile and a simple promise. I'll make sure you've got a good meal tonight. It's the least I can do. With that, he stands up and walks away as quietly as he came. But Clint's acts of kindness don't stop there. As he walks through the shelter, he quietly slips small amounts of cash into the hands of people who seem to need it the most. No fanfare, no cameras. He gives a few dollars to an older man sitting alone, his hands shaking from the cold. He buys a new jacket for another man standing near the door, visibly shivering from the draft. For a young woman with a child in her arms, Clint leaves a gift card for groceries, a simple, practical gesture to make the next few days a little easier. None of it is extravagant. No flashy checks, no cameras to capture the moment. It's just small, thoughtful acts of kindness, done without the need for recognition. The shelter staff, however, begin to take notice. They're still unsure about Clint's motivations, but there's no denying what they're seeing. Clint Eastwood, the famous actor, is here, and he's doing something more than anyone could have expected. There are no headlines, no Instagram posts. Just a man who's quietly changing lives, one gesture at a time. And as they watch him move through the shelter, the staff begins to realize that perhaps Clint's visit isn't about them at all. It's about them, the residents of the shelter, the forgotten ones who rarely see someone reach out without expecting something in return. Clint doesn't make a show of his generosity. He doesn't ask for thanks. He simply moves on, his presence a subtle reminder of the power of kindness, quiet but powerful all the same. As the day wears on, Clint's presence begins to fade into the background. He quietly finishes his rounds, and the shelter returns to its usual rhythm. The staff is still puzzled, trying to piece together the mystery of his visit. There's no entourage, no photographers, not even a whisper of a celebrity endorsement. Just a man, an older man, calm and unassuming, who wandered through the shelter, offering a kind word and a few quiet acts of generosity. By late afternoon, Clint quietly prepares to leave. He doesn't say goodbye to anyone in particular. He simply slips out the door as unobtrusive as he had entered. The shelter staff is left with nothing but the lingering sense of his presence. Jenna, who had been busy organizing some of the donations that had piled up during the day, is still trying to wrap her mind around the visit. She can't shake the feeling that something more happened while Clint was here, something beyond the quiet gestures and the small acts of kindness. She walks over to the donation box, which is usually filled with food, clothes, and the occasional cash donation. As she opens the box, her eyes scan the contents. Nothing out of the ordinary, until her gaze falls on a thick, heavy envelope buried under a pile of old clothes and unopened letters. Her heart skips a beat. She reaches for it, carefully pulling it out. The envelope is plain, unmarked, except for the words "The Homeless Shelter" written in neat, professional handwriting across the front. Jenna feels a sudden rush of anticipation. She opens the envelope and pulls out a bundle of cash, neatly stacked and secured with a rubber band. Her breath catches in her throat. It's more money than they've seen in a long time. It's enough to keep the shelter running for months, possibly longer, far beyond what anyone would expect from an average donor. But the surprise doesn't end there. As Jenna flips through the cash, she finds something else, a small, folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, she unfolds it and reads the message written inside. For the people who need it most. May this help bring some warmth and hope where it's needed. Jenna's mind races as the words sink in. This wasn't just a donation. It was a message, a gift from someone who had quietly walked into their lives and left behind something priceless. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she puts the pieces together. It had been Clint. The man who'd walked in, barely noticed by most, had left behind not just a donation, but a legacy of compassion. Jenna looks around at the staff, still in shock. She quickly gathers them together, the envelope in hand. One by one, their faces fall as they process the discovery. They had all wondered if there was something more behind Clint's visit, but none of them could have guessed that he'd left such a profound mark on the shelter. As they stand there, staring at the cash, the weight of the gesture settles in. This wasn't about publicity or an easy tax write-off. This was something real. Something meaningful. Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood, had walked through their doors today not as a celebrity, but as a man who had taken the time to see the people around him, to hear their stories, and to offer them a gift without asking for anything in return. He had come with no cameras, no fanfare, just a quiet act of generosity that would change the course of their shelter for months to come. The staff is left stunned, their minds racing. They had witnessed firsthand the power of kindness, but now they were grappling with something even greater, how a simple act of giving had left them all with a sense of awe. The man who had come into their shelter was no longer just a famous actor. He was a reminder of the compassion we can all carry, quietly, without expectation. The shelter buzzes with a quiet energy, an unspoken sense of awe hanging in the air. The staff members who had been busy running the shelter as usual just hours ago, are now gathering in small clusters, processing what had just unfolded. Some are trying to hold back tears, their emotions overwhelmed by what they've just witnessed. Others stand in disbelief, still trying to grasp the reality of it all. How could Clint Eastwood, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, come in here and do something so simple yet so meaningful? One of the volunteers murmurs. No cameras, no press, just an ordinary day at the shelter, and yet he changed everything. The feeling is almost surreal. A Hollywood icon, someone who had never been expected to walk through the door, had done exactly that, and in doing so, had shown them something deeper than they could have imagined. He hadn't come for recognition. He hadn't come for any of the usual trappings of fame. He had simply come to make a difference. The shelter staff gathers in a small circle near the back of the building. Jenna holds up the envelope, the generous donation now carefully counted and set aside. Her hands tremble slightly as she speaks, trying to put her feelings into words. He didn't come for the applause or the attention, she says, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. He came because he saw a need. Because he cared. Another staff member, Mike, who had been so skeptical at the start, nods slowly. I kept thinking there had to be some sort of catch. But no, he didn't want anything from us. He just gave. The silence settles in as they all reflect on the magnitude of Clint's quiet acts. For the staff, it's a revelation. They've seen many people come through the shelter doors, many who have given before. But this, it was different. It wasn't about charity. It was about showing up when it mattered most. It's about more than just giving, one of the other staff members, Maria, finally says, her voice full of meaning. It's about showing up when people least expect it. When no one's watching. That's when it counts. He didn't have to do this, but he did. The words resonate with the team, who exchange glances filled with understanding. It's the quiet, unspoken truth that makes all the difference. They had all been touched by his actions, not because of who he was, but because of what he did. Clint Eastwood had shown them the true power of compassion in its purest form. The staff members sit in reflective silence for a moment longer, the weight of the day's events sinking in. They had been witnesses to something more than just a donation. They had been shown the kind of selflessness that can change lives, and perhaps even change the world. As the conversation slowly winds down, the staff begins to talk about the future. How can they carry this lesson forward? How can they make sure they too are showing up when it matters most? How can they extend the same quiet generosity that Clint had shown them? For now, though, they stand united in a moment of collective understanding. The shelter had been forever changed, not by the size of the donation, but by the simple, profound impact of someone who cared. And that was a lesson they would never forget. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, signaling the end of another long day at the shelter, Clint Eastwood quietly rises from his seat. He doesn't make a grand exit or draw attention to himself. He simply nods to the staff members who have gathered near the door, a small, unassuming wave accompanying his departure. The shelter is still buzzing from the revelation of his donation, yet no one expects anything more from him. Clint's time there had already been enough to leave a lasting impact, both on the people in the shelter and on the staff who had witnessed his quiet generosity. He had given without expectation, shown kindness without recognition, and in doing so, had left behind something far more meaningful than any headline could ever capture. His departure is as understated as his arrival. No cameras, no media. Just a man walking out the door, leaving a legacy behind him. The staff watches as Clint disappears into the evening, his figure fading into the night. There's a moment of silence, a collective reflection on what had just transpired. Clint had come in quietly, spoken to a few people, offered help where it was needed, and left without fanfare. No one had expected a Hollywood legend to be so humble, so willing to go unnoticed in a place like this. But the staff, as they stand there, can't help but realize something important. They will never forget Clint Eastwood's visit, not because of his fame but because of the lesson he left behind. It wasn't about the money or the gifts, though those certainly helped. What mattered most was how Clint had shown up. He hadn't come for attention or to boost his own image. He hadn't come to be the star of the story. He came because he cared. And in doing so, he had taught them something far more powerful than any grand gesture could have. In the silence that follows his departure, the staff is left with a profound truth. Sometimes the most meaningful gestures are the ones done quietly, without any expectation of recognition. That kindness, in its purest form, doesn't need applause, cameras, or even acknowledgement. It only needs a willing heart and a willingness to give. Clint Eastwood's visit was a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most unassuming acts of kindness can have the biggest impact. It's not about being noticed, it's about noticing others. It's not about how much you give but the way you give it. And sometimes just showing up is the most powerful thing you can do. As the evening wears on, and the staff begins to return to their work, there's a new sense of purpose in the air. They will carry this lesson with them, not just in their work at the shelter but in their lives moving forward. It's a reminder that even in the quietest moments, there's always the opportunity to make a difference. Clint Eastwood's visit wasn't just about what he gave, but about what he left behind, the kind of quiet, selfless act that can change lives. In a world where acts of kindness are often overshadowed by the need for recognition, Clint reminded us that sometimes the most meaningful gestures are the ones done in silence. His visit, though seemingly simple, served as a powerful reminder that small acts of compassion can leave a lasting impact on those who need it most. It's easy to get caught up in the noise of fame and headlines, but Clint's actions demonstrated that true generosity doesn't require applause or attention. It simply requires a willingness to show up when it matters most, and to give without expecting anything in return. This story is a testament to the power of quiet kindness, how even the smallest gestures can have the biggest ripple effects. Clint Eastwood's time at the shelter wasn't about being seen. It was about making a difference, however subtle, and showing that the simplest acts of care can leave a profound legacy. So we have to ask, what do you think? Should celebrities do more to help out in situations like this? Is there a way for the public to focus more on kindness rather than the fame behind it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and perhaps together, we can inspire more quiet acts of kindness in the world.